In an old, abandoned house, a young woman, Sarah, moves in. She is curious about the strange atmosphere of the house, which seems almost frozen in time. The house is full of dust, cobwebs, and the faint smell of decay. In the hallway, she notices a large, antique mirror. It's the only object in the house that doesn't seem aged or worn down. Intrigued, she moves closer to inspect it, drawn to its mysterious presence. At first, Sarah doesn't notice anything strange about the mirror. She studies her reflection briefly, adjusting her hair, and turns to leave. However, she stops when she realizes that her reflection doesn't immediately follow her movements. It lingers a moment longer, as if frozen in place. Confused, Sarah watches the mirror for a few seconds, before brushing it off as a trick of her eyes. As she walks away from the mirror, the air around her grows cold. She hears a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the direction of the mirror. When she turns around, she sees her reflection smiling back at her, something she hadn't done. The smile is unsettling, too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face. She takes a step forward, her breath catching in her throat, unsure of what she's seeing. The smile in the mirror fades into a blank expression, but Sarah still feels uneasy. She reaches out to touch the mirror, but as soon as her fingers make contact with the glass, the reflection pulls back, as if it's trying to avoid her touch. This confuses her even more, and her heart begins to race. She pulls her hand away and turns to leave. But the moment she steps away, the reflection lingers, staring back at her with an unnatural stillness. Sarah begins to feel a growing sense of dread. The feeling of being watched intensifies, and she becomes aware that the reflection in the mirror isn't just mimicking her movements, it's acting independently. The reflection moves on its own, subtly at first, but more noticeably as time goes on. Sarah notices that when she moves, the reflection is just a split second behind. Frightened now, Sarah steps back from the mirror, her eyes wide with panic. She decides to leave the room, but the reflection doesn't follow. Instead, it remains fixed, staring at her with eyes that seem too knowing, too empty. The whispers in the air grow louder, more insistent. Sarah feels an overwhelming pull toward the mirror, as if it is calling her. She fights the urge to look into it. But the voice inside her head grows stronger, louder. Unable to resist, Sarah returns to the mirror, her reflection watching her with a cold, knowing gaze. This time, the reflection smiles again, but this time it's not the same as before. The smile is twisted, almost malicious. The reflection begins to move without her, its actions growing more erratic. Sarah backs away quickly, but the mirror seems to pull her in, drawing her closer with an invisible force. With a final, terrified scream, Sarah reaches out to the mirror once more. The reflection mimics her actions, but this time it grabs hold of her hand, pulling her into the glass. The force is overwhelming, and no matter how hard Sarah struggles, she is dragged in, her body pressed against the mirror's cold surface. The moment she crosses the threshold, everything goes dark. The only sound is her fading scream as the mirror returns to its original state, calm and undisturbed. Time seems to stand still. The mirror reflects only an empty hallway, but if one looks closely enough, they might catch a fleeting glimpse of Sarah's eyes, wide, panicked, and trapped within the glass. The mirror waits patiently, its surface as still as ever, but behind it something moves, something that's always watching, always waiting for the next person to look too closely. Sarah stands in the dim hallway staring at the antique mirror. It came with the house, just like everything else her grandmother left behind. She should be used to it by now, but something about it always makes her uneasy. She tells herself it's just an old mirror, nothing more. Yet every time she passes it, she swears she sees something out of place, something shifting just beyond the glass. She shakes her head, forcing a laugh under her breath. She's been working too hard, barely sleeping. That's all it is. Still, she hesitates before stepping closer. Her reflection stares back, the hallway lamp casting a soft glow over her tired face. Everything looks normal. She exhales, about to turn away, then she sees it. A shadow. At the very edge of the mirror, where the glass darkens slightly, something moves. It's faint, barely there, but it's real. Her stomach twists. Her first instinct is to back away, but something keeps her frozen in place. Her mind races through explanations. A trick of the light? A smudge on the glass? A shadow. At the very edge of the mirror, where the glass darkens slightly, something moves. It's faint, barely there, but it's real. Her stomach twists. Her first instinct is to back away, but something keeps her frozen in place. Her mind races through explanations. A trick of the light? A smudge on the glass? Then the shadow moves again, not like a reflection, but like something inside the mirror. Sarah's breath catches. She leans in, heart pounding, eyes straining to see. The longer she looks, the more she realizes. It's not just a shadow, it's a hand. Pale fingers tap from inside the glass. Sarah stumbles backward, her pulse roaring in her ears. The tapping stops. The room feels colder. For a long moment, nothing happens. The silence stretches. Maybe she imagined it, maybe the glass shatters. Sarah barely has time to scream before covering her face, expecting shards to rain down. But when she opens her eyes, the mirror is still intact, not a single crack. But her reflection is different. Something is behind her. A figure stands in the reflection, towering over her shoulder. Its skin is ashen, its eyes black pits, hollow and endless. Sarah spins around, nothing. She turns back, and now, in the mirror, the figure is grinning. Then it speaks. "I see you." The voice is wrong, warped, echoing, curling around her like fingers in the dark. Sarah chokes on a breath. "This isn't real," she whispers. But the figure raises its hand and presses it against the glass. The surface ripples like water. Then it reaches through. Cold fingers brush her wrist. Sarah screams. And then silence. The next morning, the house is quiet again. The mirror waits patiently, its surface smooth and still. But behind it, something new stirs. Something with Sarah's face. And it watches, waiting for the next person to look too closely. Sarah's final moments. Sarah stared at the mirror, heart pounding. Her reflection wasn't hers. It grinned while she stood frozen. "This isn't real," she whispered. The glass rippled. The reflection stepped forward.